A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. Glad you're with me on the program today. We're going to be talking with John Diedrich from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel here in a minute or two. I wrote about this new series that John has released called Behind the Gun at Bearing Arms on Friday. And as I said, it's a mainstream media piece on guns that's actually worth reading. And I stand by that. This is a very in-depth series. I think a total of 14 stories. John Diedrich spent about 9 months putting this together. And unlike the vast majority of, big investigative reports on anything having to do with gun owners or gun ownership, Behind the Gun does not come replete with a series of anti-gun policy recommendations. He actually allows gun owners to tell their stories. He talks about gun-involved deaths in Wisconsin and what is being done on the part of gun owners themselves to try to bring those numbers down, whether it is a gun store owner who is saying, listen, if you're having a mental health crisis or somebody in your house is having a mental health crisis, you can temporarily store your firearms with me. To the guy, not a former gang member, but definitely somebody running with a bad crowd on the mean streets of Milwaukee, who is now a firearms instructor and trying to reduce gun violence in an urban setting. Anyway, it was a fascinating series. Looking forward to talking about it in greater detail with John Diedrich here in just a moment or two. Before we do that, however, let's talk about this for a second. Biden's America. It is crushing us. You've got companies laying off tens of thousands of workers, one after the other. Americans working two jobs just to get by. Inflation pushing hardworking families to the brink, as you well know, every time you go to the grocery store. And a digital dollar could be coming down the pipeline to completely destroy our way of life. The truth is, you need a plan. You know it, and I know it. And that's why you should call Goldco. So you can diversify your savings and investments with gold and silver before things get worse. They're a 6-time Inc. 5000 winner, 2022 Company of the Year, with thousands of 5-star reviews, and they've helped people like you and me place over $1 billion in gold and silver. They're offering up to $10,000 in free silver while supplies last. And if you contact them today, qualified callers will get a free Ronald Reagan half-ounce silver coin. So don't wait. Call Goldco at 855-412-3806 today. That's 855-412-3806. And now, let's turn our attention to today's interview with John Diedrich of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Take a look and a listen. John, thanks so much for coming on the program, sir. It's so good to see you again.
Thanks, Cam. Great to see you.
Absolutely. And I know I said this in my email, but let me just say again, congratulations and thank you for writing a really incredible series. All too often when I'm looking at mainstream media coverage of gun-related issues, it's so easy for me to say, okay, they should have done this, they should have done that. And I didn't see your name attached to this series when I first saw it, and I was like, oh boy, here we go. And then when I saw your name, I was like, okay, John Diedrich's name sounds familiar. I went back through my middle Rolodex, was like, oh yeah, I have talked with John before, did excellent work talking about the ATF. And then I started with your Reporter's Notebook. That was the first of the Behind the Gun series that I read. And I would encourage folks, I think that's a really good place to start, actually, because you kind of get into the backstory of how this project came to be and really what the mindset was going in, right? And it sounds like going in, you didn't want to fall prey to pointing the finger at gun owners and saying, well, the solution is banning guns or red flag laws. Like it sounds like that was never really the scope of this project from the get-go. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that that's a great setup, and and great to see you again. And thanks for those kind words. So that Reporter's Notebook is something we don't often do. It's writing in the first person. It's sort of pulling the curtain back, sort of thing. And I just felt like a couple of my editors at the paper, when I was telling them the story behind the story, they really encouraged me to sort of take that chance, which is kind of what it feels like sometimes writing in the first person. But it's an interesting entry point. And, again, I think it is an interesting one because it brings you upstream from the actual story in the end. Yeah. So this story, I've written about guns, as you said, for a while. And people always ask me this question: are you a gun owner? I am not a gun owner. And I have covered guns for a long time. I've shot quite a bit. I used to cover the military in Colorado Springs, deployed a few times, and covered the police department. That is a question I would get quite a bit in this project. And I just was, and I say it in the column too. But, I think the thing that we tried to do here was, well, first of all, we look for something different. I mean, if you're writing the same thing, and I do this, too, it's like you're looking for something different than not just that I've written, but that many other people have written. So just from a standpoint of, can we say something new and different? That's appealing to me. So that's a starting point. And then the question became, well, could we say something different and important that might reveal something? So that's where my editor, George Stanley, who's now retired, it was his idea for this story. He's a hunter. He actually, in our poll that we come out with, he's sort of a classic. He owns 5 guns. That puts him right in the heartland of our survey of we had 1 and more than 5, but he was in that group. And he just said, hey, I think if you go out and talk to gun owners, you will find a different thread and a different narrative. And so that set me on this journey. The other thing, and you mentioned, and I say this in the essay, is that I had this interview with John Roman early on. So John Roman is a criminologist, sociologist, and he works at NORC, which is the opinion research coalition, or they're at the University of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And he said something that really caught my attention early on. He said, so there's so many firearms. I mean, there's a little bit of debate around there, roughly 400 million, maybe 420, maybe a little less, whatever, a lot. Okay. So he said, and there's a lot of things that happen that are not good outcomes or tragic outcomes or unintended outcomes. But he said there's a lot that doesn't happen with. And so there's different categories that probably falls into. But he said, are there things that we can learn about in that other category that could help populate where we see things that are unintended, tragic, and so forth happening on the other side? It just was a whole mind shift. And it really sent me to and among gun owners. And that's really where I've spent the majority of this project, is really in that spot. We're collecting data about gun deaths and so forth. But really what I got in there was from the point of view of gun owners. And actually, I didn't know at the beginning how I would be received in that. I don't really call it a community, because I don't really think it is a community. It's a lot of different people from all different walks of life who happen to own this object. Right? It's like car owners. There's not really a car community. There's people who own cars, and there's reasons why, and there's probably stronger reasons, and there's constitutional factors that aren't with cars. I get all that. It's just like, as a comparative thing, to see people and their sort of humanity first before a label was kind of what's guided me.
And I think that comes through, right? Because, and I would disagree a little bit. I think that there probably is, first of all, there are probably going to be some car owners who say there absolutely is a car community. I got my vintage car, my restored car, and I think you find the same thing. But I don't think that there is one community of gun owners, right? I think you've got a lot of different, it's a big tent, but a lot of different, maybe, seating groups underneath that big tent. And you did such a great job of, again, I think exploring just who some of these gun owners are and their backgrounds, what they're trying to do, right? Because one of the things I think that informed your story is looking at gun-involved deaths in Wisconsin. I mean, that was sort of the impetus, right? And very quickly, you learn that the vast majority of gun-involved deaths in Wisconsin are suicides. 71 out of every 100 gun-involved deaths, which is, I think, higher than the national average. Mm-hmm. But John, one of the things I think you did is so important is you delineated the difference between a suicide and a homicide, or even, the difference between a suicide in an adolescent and the suicide in a middle-aged man, right? Because each one of those things is going to have a different response. You're going to have different ways, different strategies, different tactics to use to bring those numbers down. And this is one of the things that's so frustrating to me, writing about this from a pro Second Amendment perspective, is all too often we just see this lumped all together, right? Or sometimes even just conflating homicides and suicides. We saw this recently in a hearing on Capitol Hill about gun violence as a public health epidemic. I think Senator John Kennedy talked about the violent crime rate in Chicago. And one of the witnesses, I can't remember where she was from, might have been University of Pennsylvania, responded by talking about gun deaths overall in places like Louisiana and Mississippi. And, they're jousting and they're jockeying for position and they're talking points. But both of them, I think, kind of neglected that the fact that we're talking about very different things with very different, I don't even say solutions, but very different strategies in addressing these issues. And I thought you did a fantastic job of pointing out, okay, these things are different, right? The commonality, maybe a gun is involved, but if you're looking at how to bring down these numbers, you can't use a program like, Operation Ceasefire that is designed to, crack down on violent crime if you're trying to reduce suicides in rural Wisconsin. That's not going to work.
Yeah, no, that's really well said. And there is again, I guess what we leaned into is like when you see simple narratives, kind of beware. It's more complicated and the world's more complicated than, those little sound bites. And again, that's, social media does that really well. It simplifies things. It flattens people too. It flattens people's stories and doesn't really show the complexity within them. And so, so when I started gathering the numbers, 71 out of 100, it's just I sort of knew it. I mean, because of the work that I've done, but I didn't really know it. And I went to the state. They wouldn't give us the data for some other reasons that are detailed, but we ended up going out to every county. And what we saw across Wisconsin was this picture. And actually we saw, because the narrative, if you will, of gun deaths in Wisconsin is really defined by Milwaukee County, which is a large urban area here. And, maybe similar to like Pennsylvania, where you have like Philly or Pittsburgh, and they have these very rural areas too. That's what we have. And what you see in those rural areas is that suicide is just like there's almost no homicide. And just to go through the numbers, in Wisconsin, 71 out of 100 are suicides, 25 are homicides, 2 are police involved, 1 is an accidental, and then the rest are sort of undetermined, which is another question. But really small numbers. So you put together 2% for police shooting, 1% for accidentals. Those get a lot of publicity, and there's probably good reasons for that. But just to understand that we in the media will highlight the unusual sometimes because they're newsworthy, right? So like that's it. But that doesn't necessarily mean you don't do it, but you put it into context to say, hey, a friend of mine who's a former Army intelligence officer, he said, yeah, you guys highlight the unusual and you suppress the usual. And that's okay as long as you're telling people that, because the impression you might get is there are suicides are not what they are, but you add those 3 categories, homicide, accidents, police involved together, they don't even add up to, to 1/3 of the gun deaths in Wisconsin. So just that is a starting point and pulling the numbers out. And to your point about then what do you do with it? There's a comment from Jean Papalia, who's a retired police officer from Madison and now works in suicide prevention space. She said, I'm just always really, when people say, here's the one solution, okay, like I'm suspicious. Like it's complicated. And she's like, we can do complicated things. That's okay. But she said, like when somebody says like, if it were just background checks, okay, well, that could be part of the discussion, but does that work with suicides? Not so much, right? So there is other stuff that you could talk about on the suicide stuff. Well, accidental or negligent, yeah, there's maybe some things in there, but our background checks or red flag laws or something else approaching that, and then what's appropriate to discuss when the government might be involved and when this might be among the gun communities, if I might use that phrase, voluntary things, things where gun owners essentially talk to themselves and among themselves and actually discuss these issues. And that was fascinating because I had no idea that discussion was happening. And like shame on me for not knowing that, because I didn't know. And I've written, and I don't want to throw shade on other reporters, right? I don't want to throw them under the bus and say, oh, like in the process, they're all we're coming up short, because I've been doing this for 20 years and I've written these same stories. Like I have. So I'm not like saying, hey, you guys all, and and I've got it all figured out here, because it was the gift of the fellowship, and some time, and just to be able to see some things, and again, some sources who entrusted their story to me, that were really able to allow me to see things differently.
But again, you had to put that together, and so I do want to give you credit. I will, just for the sake of not drawing any undue shade on you, I will resist the urge to bash your colleagues in the media, and we'll focus on the positive for this show. But talking to Mike Sedini, for example, with Walk the Talk America, you say that you were unaware of this. And look, for good reason. Unfortunately, groups like Walk the Talk America, or the gun store owner that you spoke to, who said, listen, if someone's, having a crisis, they need to get their guns out of their home temporarily, they can store them here, no problem. Those don't get a lot of coverage, right? Mike Sedini will complain. It's frustrating that Walk the Talk America and programs like this, where gun owners are sort of leading the way and having these conversations, they don't get the coverage that I think that they deserve. And so I applaud you for actually highlighting the work that gun owners are doing, because this is something, this is one of the talking points that drives me crazy from gun control advocates. They if you don't agree with X, Y, or Z, whatever proposal it is that they're offering, you must not care. Right? You don't care about people who are being murdered. You don't care about people who are taking their own life. You don't care about kids who are being shot. You don't care, or you love your guns more than you care about these problems. And I don't think anybody could read the profiles of the gun owners that you highlighted and walk away thinking that those folks don't care. And so for that alone, I think you did a public service in just, again, humanizing a group of Americans that all too often I think is dehumanized by members of the media, by, gun control activists. And look, my side does it too, right? We like to dehumanize our enemies, but or our political opponents. But I just thought it was great to actually see the human side and the complicated side, right? One of the profiles that I highlighted in my review of your series was the coroner from. You're going to have to help me pronounce the name of the county, John.
Manitowoc.
Thank you.
County.
Who is, a Democrat. He believes in red flag laws, but he also doesn't believe in bans on, AR-15s and modern sporting rifles. Every one of these profiles, I think, really did defy the stereotypes of gun owners that we see all the time. And as you say, instead of flattening out these people and their experiences, you sort of created a pop-up book, and allowing them to be, I think, a little bit more fleshed out than what we would normally see.
Yeah, thank you for that. And working with my my editor on this project, Greg Borowski, I kept coming to him saying, telling him the stories of these, because we didn't envision this to be the way it was. I mean, the way the series, starts off is we've got this, all this data, and it's a pretty data heavy story. We do have some narrative within that, some story told. I should also say, you mentioned Chuck Lovelace. So he started the Wisconsin, the Gun Shop Project, and secure storage here, temporary storage at gun shops in Wisconsin. Again, a movement that's been written about a bit, but not super well known among people. And a lot of people in Wisconsin, even among suicide prevention, didn't know about this. And what we did in this case, which is unusual, is we led with what we would call a solution story. So Chuck and the Gun Shop Project was our first story out the door. So before we even told people about the 71%, you don't really necessarily get that when you see the series now, because Chuck kind of tucks up under there. But Chuck came out in August. And so that's different. And I guess our starting spot was, hey, people are already pretty bummed to depressed about gun deaths. And I'm just going to tell you, it's a lot worse than you know. Okay. I'm going to tell you with nuance and some things that could be helpful. But let's start with solutions. Let's come with some hope and resilience to start as a moving spot. So that was the beginning with that. And I saw that talking to Chuck about the story he was willing to tell. And that helped guide me. And as I went to other gun owners, And, and when you look at the feature, what I tried to do was not label them as gun owners. So you get that as you read the stories, but hopefully it just sort of naturally, organically comes through. Some are, right at the lead, but others, like you don't get that Yvette Wolfel, whose son died by gun suicide. She's a gun owner. That kind of comes later on, and I think it's sort of a surprising reveal. Other people, it's higher up. Kurt Green, you're talking about the coroner, and he jokes, yeah, I'm a Second Amendment rights supporter, 2A, and I'm a Democrat, so nobody will talk to me, and I said, Kurt, how do you even exist? Like, are you a unicorn or what? Like, he's like, I don't really see an inconsistency with it. And he lays it out, and it's pretty interesting, like from his background. And then, Mike Sedini and his story of how he comes to this. Everyone I went through, I would bring to my editor, and he's like, dang, that's an interesting story. He said, let's think about breaking those out and readers are always telling us to give us a lot mammoth stories, but more digestible ones, but give them a little bit of space. He also, and I would just commend to people to watch the videos, because that was also, I think, important to have people in their words. And Greg was like, because of kind of what's been done, people might think reading these in print, is this really a person? Like, is this real? And I think so it was helpful for us to help people just be able to say in their words, not exactly what's said in the article, but you get that sense of their humanity first, right? Seeing them first. That's where the Behind the Gun name came from. See the humanity in the person first, tell the stories that might contradict what you think, but wouldn't be sort of, again, flattened in a sort of cartoonish way. That, again, I'm not throwing others on. I mean, I've done this before, where you sort of have somebody who serves a purpose to a data point, and it's like 4 paragraphs, and then you're on to the next thing. But it's like, I want to know more about that person, and that was kind of what guided us.
So you talk about the first bit of this series coming out in August. I think there are 14 parts that are on the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel website. Is there more to come, John?
Yeah, so there is, we had that first part, and then we had all this data for the second part. The third part was a poll that we did, and we featured some gun owners. And now what we're doing is there's some follow-up, and we've got some very encouraging impacts. That's going to be the first thing out. And usually a lot of times with impacts, what we do is I do usually investigative. This is more explanatory public service, but we'll call and say, like, what do the legislators say? What do the governors say? What, is there going to be some city government action or whatever? Mm-hmm. We're sort of deliberately not doing that here, because I sort of know what the different sides are going to say. If there are two sides, the sort of binary either or side, I sort of know. So we're leaning more into like what's happening. And one of the really encouraging things, one of the guys I talked to, Mike Ensigy, he is telling me, he's telling me that he does suicide prevention work. He's retired from the Army. He's received, since this series ran, 5 calls from people who were considering taking their life, and all good outcomes. People who voluntarily went in to get help, who have voluntarily separated from their firearms during this time of crisis, good outcomes. And so that's just, man, that's what this is about.
Absolutely. And again, as you say, this is that really is what this is about. And that's the commonality, I think, that is found throughout all of the people that you interviewed, is that we do care about this issue. We do want to save lives. And we believe that there's a way to do that without destroying a fundamental civil liberty. And, you can have both of those things. You can have a tradition and a culture of responsible gun ownership. At the same time, those gun owners are a part of the solution, right? As opposed to, I think, how we see it presented all too often, that gun owners are just the problem. And I think that really is the biggest takeaway for me from Behind the Gun is that, again, gun owners are out there actively working to ensure that those folks who are, again, having those thoughts live to see another day, that they make it through those moments, right? And that's one of the things that so many of the activists talk about, that if you can just get that person through that moment of crisis until the crisis subsides, then, again, that gives them the opportunity to to go on to lead fulfilling lives. And I think most of us as gun owners know somebody who has taken their life, whether with a firearm or without a firearm. And, if you have lost somebody who's close to you, if you've lost somebody that you love in those circumstances, I don't know how you cannot want to try to spare, other folks the grief and the heartache, and to keep those folks alive until a better day. So the fact that this series has had that kind of outcome already, congratulations, because that is truly the best kind of journalism that you can do, John. And I got to say, I look forward to reading the rest of your series as it continues. But thank you for writing something that I think does actually move the ball forward. It is unlike almost everything that I've seen written on the gun issue. And I hope that it will inspire other reporters around the country to kind of channel their own inner John Diedrich and to branch out and do something different, to go behind the gun and to start looking at this from a slightly different perspective.
Thanks, Cam. I really appreciate it. It means a lot, and great to be with you.
Absolutely. So listen, let's not make it 7 years between appearances on Cam and Company next time. Okay.
Yeah. We'll have more in the new year, Q1. And so, we'll have more to talk about.
Fantastic. John, thanks so much. Happy holidays to you, and look forward to talking to you again next year.
Thanks. Same. Happy holidays to you.
My thanks to John joining me on the program. Hopefully it won't be another 6 or 7 years before we have him back on Cam and Company. Right now, let's turn our attention to today's armed citizen story, our good deed of the day, and our recidivist report. We'll start there with a case out of Chicago. CWB Chicago reporting a man on parole for a robbery at a Prada store is back in trouble after allegedly helping to rob a utility crew of a sewer camera. What a stupid thing to send somebody back to prison. But that may very well be the case for a guy named Gaddafi Green. Also a pretty bad name there, too. Gaddafi Green received a 42-month prison sentence in February for participating in the robbery of a Prada store in downtown Chicago last year. But with good behavior and other credits, CWB Chicago reports he got out of prison in late July. Yeah, not much time served for that 42-month sentence. They report he's probably heading back to prison now after prosecutors have charged him and 3 other men with robbing a work crew on the south side of Chicago last week. A security guard allegedly allowed Green inside the Prada store in the afternoon of January 12, 2022. Green then blocked the guard's path, allowed 3 accomplices to enter in behind him. The 24-year-old Green, as well as one of the accomplices, then attacked the guard while the other 2 gathered merchandise worth about $46,000. At one point, they actually rammed the guard with a clothing rack, which caused him to fall to the ground and injure his wrist. Even though he's been out of prison for barely 4 months, his parole status is currently under review following the armed robbery of 3 utility workers. This happened last Wednesday morning. Police say 3 workers were on the job when 4 armed men jumped out of a stolen Jeep. The gunman took a sewer camera reel and an accompanying camera from the workers and then fled the scene. One of those like snakes, right? With a fiber optic camera on the end. Cops were able to track a GPS device on the equipment, located the Jeep not far away. Green, along with 25-year-old Shaquan Burden, 19-year-old Marquise Ramier, and 26-year-old Jawan Green all ran from the Jeep but were arrested nearby. Police also were able to retrieve the stolen camera equipment from inside the Jeep. All 4 men ordered detained by a judge to await trial, each charged with 3 counts of armed robbery with a firearm as well as misdemeanor criminal trespass to a vehicle. Burden also charged with a felony narcotics possession count. Like Gaddafi Green, police say the 19-year-old Marquise Ramier, also on parole at the time of the robbery, he was released even more recently than Green, according to CWB Chicago, back in September, late September, September 22nd, after serving just half of an 18-month sentence that he received for a felony gun possession charge. How about that? Slaps on the wrist, back on the street, and rinse and repeat there in Chicago. Today's armed citizen story. Baltimore County. Not Baltimore City, although I'm surprised we haven't seen more armed citizen stories there, too. But a homeowner fatally shooting an armed intruder in Baltimore County over the weekend. According to WBFF in Baltimore, it was about 9:45 Saturday night when officers with the Baltimore County Police Department responded for a report of a shooting. According to police, once on scene, officers located an adult man who had sustained multiple gunshot wounds, who was pronounced dead at the scene. Detectives believe the armed suspect was attempting to gain access to a resident's home. That's when the homeowner discharged his firearm, striking the suspect. Police say while the detectives continue to investigate the circumstances surrounding the case, they are also asking folks with any pertinent information to contact homicide detectives. But at this point, again, looks to be a case of self-defense there in Baltimore County. Finally today, our good deed of the day, in the right place at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing. A police officer in Hanson, Massachusetts, who not only helped an elderly woman get her car fixed, but also was able to find her temporary housing. This is one of those stories that honestly just breaks your heart. Officer Leo Arsenault, on Thursday night, he's on the job. He runs across a woman, older lady, who's sitting in her car in the parking lot of a business that had closed down for the night. Car's out of gas, and the battery is dead. Her cell phone was dead as well. And she told Officer Arsenault that she had no place to stay for the night. He found her a hotel room, paid for her stay out of pocket, talked with her and figured out a way for her to be picked up in the morning. He also reached out to a local company called Macquarie Auto of Hanson to have her battery recharged, to have her tank filled up. According to the local police there in CBS Boston, the woman, extremely grateful, explained that the situation she's in is only temporary. And again, it probably would have been very difficult for Officer Leo Arsenault to just pass that woman on by, right? But in the right place, at the right time, willing and able to go above and beyond. I mean, there's a world of difference between just driving by, nothing to see here, and reaching into your own pocket and saying, hey, you know what? You can't stay here tonight. We're going to put you up somewhere. We'll figure out what to do in the morning, but we're going to get you taken care of. Officer Arsenault didn't have to do that either, but he did. And again, we thank him for his very, very good deed. And we hope that this woman is soon back home where she is safe and warm. That is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. I want to thank you for being a part of the program as always. Looking forward to being back with you again tomorrow for even more of the latest Second Amendment news and information from all across the nation. But you don't have to wait until then. Just go to bearingarms.com. We're keeping you up to date on all of the latest 2A information that you need to know about. And if you like what you see, I'd encourage you to become a VIP or VIP Gold member. All you have to do, go to bearingarms.com/subscribe, use the promo code GUNRIGHTS, and you can get a significant savings on your VIP membership. Not only are we going to give you exclusive content that you won't find anywhere else, news stories and analysis that matter, you will get the warm, fuzzy feeling of knowing that you are supporting the independent pro-Second Amendment journalism that we're doing at Bearing Arms. And we thank you very much for that. Enjoy the rest of your Monday, as well as the start of a work week can be enjoyed. We'll see you back here tomorrow for 2A Tuesday. Until then, be well, be safe, and be free.